What's going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with another one. So I saw this picture on Pinterest, my light, and I thought I'd give it a try. So I've tied a few of these. It's kind of like a pheasant tail with a couple things added into it. And so I've actually tied a few of these, and I've gone back and forth on the hook. And in the vise here, I've got just a standard, this is a U101 Umpqua Nymph hook. But I've also liked the Daiichi 1260. They're a lot thinner, but I like those Daiichi ones because you can see the gap on the hook compared to the Nymph is a lot smaller. And if you're going to use these how I do, pan fishing and stuff like that, sometimes those finicky little nips, that a smaller gap you can get more bites. But I decided I'll do it on this is a size 10. This is a 5/32 metallic blue, light blue, something like that, tungsten bead. I've got 051 lead-free wire here. I'm going to use Pheasant for the body, and this is actually UV2 in Kingfisher blue. And the first thing I'm going to do, I've got my thread down there. This is just standard 70 Denier black UTC. I'm going to put a pretty short tail on this because it's already such a long shank that I really don't want a long tail. And I'm going to do this a little differently because the first one I did, the body got too thick with all of these wraps, and then I'm going to put some wire on there, and I'm going to keep my thread down there. So I'm going to, there's a little strip of tinsel that goes from the pheasant all the way up. It's going to end up going up to the head. And I've actually used some Perdigone, this is Nature Spirit transparent UV strips. I used these on the first like 3 or 4 I did, but this is going to be black and blue, and so I've got a little piece of blue tinsel. This is medium. If I had small, I would use it because this does end up coming a little big, but beggars can't be choosers. So I'm actually going to put my wire in first because I'm going to wrap that last. This is just this is actually Dun brassy UTC because I didn't have black, but it looks black. I'm going to put this wire after I drop it. I'm going to tie this in back here, and I'm going to bring my wire up, but I'm going to put it up to where my lead-free starts because I'm going to end up wrapping this in, but I'm going to keep it, I want to keep it right on the side. I'm just going to put a couple wraps in there, and then I'm going to get my tinsel down, and I want this to be right on top. The biggest thing I have with nymphs like this is getting everything perfect. Rarely does everything turn out perfect where the tinsel's right on top, the wire wraps are perfect. I'm going to put some wings in, you know, if those are perfectly both on the side, perfect amounts on both sides, perfect length on both sides, and then I'm going to use some thin skin. All of these little tiny things, something ends up being a little off, but I'm not, this isn't for Fly Tire magazine, so I'm going to get this tinsel right on top, if it lets me. And then you can kind of just eyeball it. And this, again, this tinsel's too big, so that's alright. So now I'll lift up my pheasant, and I'm going to wrap up. I want to make sure I keep this wire on the side. I'm just going to touching wraps all the way up. Then I'm going to build a little bit of a body. I want it thin, but I don't need it like crazy thin. And I've got just a little bit of wire left. I'm actually going to use a good pair of scissors to get this, because I don't want that. That's alright. That won't be too bad. So now I'm going to build up a body, uncord my thread, and I'll build up my body. Alright, so I've got my body down, and it's a little bit thinner at the top. I didn't taper it all the way up because I'm going to have a bunch of stuff up there anyway. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this pheasant once, or a half, and I'm going to twist it up just a little, just to kind of keep those in there together. And then I'll do usually 2 wraps, and I'm going to bring my fingers right to the edge, and I'm just going to use my rotary tool for this, just because I don't use my rotary a ton, but now I'm going to go right up to it. Did I have much room left? Not really. Pheasant is, it usually follows directions fairly well. So just enough left. So now I'm going to bring my tinsel as straight as I can. I'm going to put some tension on it. This is one of the easier ones to kind of get relatively close. But again, this tinsel is just a little too big, and it's just too small for me to cut a nice, like I can't cut this in half. If I could, I would. So I'm going to leave my tinsel on here, change my camera battery, and then I'm going to do my wraps. Alright, so I wrap that pheasant in normal, so I'm going to do reverse wraps. I'm actually going to bring this tinsel just back. I'm going to do reverse wraps on this, but pretty light. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to pull too hard, because sometimes when you pull this wire too hard, it'll spin your tinsel onto the side. It'd be your side, or my side, your side if you're tying. So I'll just do 4 wraps, and then I'm going to come up to here. It's always a little bit weird. Reverse. I'll do 3, and then I'm going to bring my wire back and just do a couple wraps right over where it twists. Then I can helicopter that off. Now this isn't, yeah, this is thin skin. You could use, oh no, this is Fino skin. This is Fino skin. They're super similar. I've got a bunch of just both. Fulling Mill just started making stuff too, so I got one of those. But this is actually Fino skin. You can, if you know the difference, then awesome. I mean, it's just a little maybe thinner. It's a little bit easier to work, not necessarily easier to work with, but For me, it bends a little bit easier. I'm going to make sure that it's flush. And then I'm just going to tie this in right on top. And I just cut these strips. I just cut one off, and then I'll show you in a sec. It's just easier to cut one long strip, and for me, and then you can trim that one down as opposed to cutting a super small strip. So I just want to make sure when I'm pulling over this Fino skin, I've got no thread showing. But I'm going to go a little bit farther back. Maybe like right there. Should be good. And again, getting this perfect is always fun. So I went back and forth with what dubbing I was going to use. I ended up going with, I had a couple different Peacock colored dubbings, natural dubbings. This is a Spectra blend by Orvis. This has some blue in it, just a little bit of blue. So it kind of matches a little bit. I was going to go all black, but then I realized when you wrap this pheasant, this Kingfisher blue, it actually doesn't come out super blue. And I wanted a black and blue jig. So the more blue I can add, the better. So I'm just going to wrap this, get a big one right there. That was way off. I'm going to bring it all the way up to the bead. But I'm going to end up wrapping back into my dubbing a little bit. So now I'm going to do my wings. So I've stripped a just a hen feather, and I've actually kept the back part. This kind of looks like a super mini zonker. And so if you can get that into a dubbing loop and twist it up, it's kind of like a mini, you can make a mini leech. So I usually keep those in a little bag. So I've got my feather. I'm actually going to put my feather kind of right on my pointer finger, and I'm going to cut out just a little, just the top part of my feather. Maybe I'll go a little bit more. So now I make a little V, and I'm going to put the base of this V right where I want. So I'm going to come back in my dubbing just a little bit, because I want those wings a little bit farther back. I'm going to put this, the base of this V, the point of it, right where my thread is. And again, this is another one of those things. You can kind of line this stem up with the eye of your hook, and that usually helps a little getting these things on how you want them. I'm going to do a loose wrap and a second loose wrap, and now they're not super tight on there, so I can kind of maneuver them a little bit. And then sometimes you gotta trim a little bit off. When I pull this, and then when I bring my Fino skin up, it'll separate those wings. But I'm not going to do that yet. I want to make sure I want them a little bit shorter, so if I pull, it'll get them a little bit shorter. I can already tell they're going to be off a little tiny micro bit. I'm going to pull those down where I want them to be. And I don't want this video to be 4 hours with me messing with a feather, so now I'm going to pull down, tighten up that thread just to kind of lock those in. And again, if they're in too far, like you can see this one right here it's kind of pushing onto my jig, but if I pull that, you can see it opens up that little spot. So try not to do all your work before you pull that Fino skin over, or thin skin, or little dubbing down here. That same Peacock. Just to bulk it up a little. That's got a lot of blue in it. That's what I want. Pull that over again. 2 times, that's good practice. And again, those wings drive me nuts every time. Even if they're off by a 1/2 millimeter, you'll notice. And then, so once I get this Fino skin on, so if the Fino skin is at an angle, if it's off a little bit, don't try and correct it with your tinsel. When I pull this tinsel over, even if that Fino skin's off, I still want to center my tinsel on it. Because if you try and correct it with your tinsel, now your Fino skin's off of the bead, and then your tinsel is going to be off of the Fino skin. That sounds really complicated, but just center it on to your material. Don't try and fix the mistake that you already made, because it's not going to happen. So I'll trim off my tinsel. This has some good wraps on it, so I can give it some good pressure. Just gonna get as close as I can. So now I've got just some thread showing on the underside, but I don't want to get dubbing on top. So I'm gonna just take the smallest amount of dubbing. I'm actually gonna kinda ball it up a little. Just like a tiny, tiny bit. Get that guard hair out of there. And I'm going to put this just on the underside of my Nymph, just to cover some of that up. So when I go to whip finish, I just gotta watch out I don't go over too much of that dubbing that I just put down, but I'm going to give it a good tug to see if I can sneak any of that stuff under the rest of the room in that bead. And now, again, those wings aren't perfect. You can kind of mess with them a little. I'm pulling at my dubbing. They turned out decent. You can kind of see they're pretty flat. They're almost a little, I think they look decent. But now I'm going to take, you can use thin or thick. It really doesn't matter. I think thick is just easier to work with on this case. So that's what I'm going with. I don't want too much of that thin. If you use the thin, just do multiple layers, and I'm just going to run it right down the bead and then come right to my wing on both sides. And then a fun trick I learned, so now I can let that sit. With the thin, you gotta really work with it. I don't have any bubbles in here. If you ever get bubbles, if you take a lighter and you just run it right at the top, right over the UV gel or whatever you want to call it, those bubbles will come out. So I'm just gonna hit this with some UV light. And I don't want an overly large bulbous case on this. I just want that tinsel to shine a little bit, pop that black, and there you have it. This is a cool little nymph. I've tied some brown ones. Those wings didn't turn out very good, but Junior's Fishing Company, juniorsfishing.com. Like and subscribe. Yeah, I got a couple more in the works, so we'll see you on the next one.